So, final session of today. I'm really excited about this. I actually work with Michelle. So, Michelle's got an interesting background, coming all the way from mobile marketing through to customer success and now in product marketing. Was a finalist of the year of, is it Messaging Maestro? So, really proud about that. And she's going to be talking about, so today we've heard from a lot of experts around a particular idea, and something that I have noticed, and we talk about this a lot, that we're all really good at the one thing, and it's not just within product marketing, it's within our businesses as a whole. But how do you bring all those things together? And so Michelle's going to give us a little bit of a case study of a project that I started, and Michelle has done far better than I ever could. So last session of the day, if we can just pay attention and...
no pressure.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'll get out of the way.
I'm guessing the play button is the clicker?
Yes.
Cool. Hi. As Andrew said, I run Deepstar with him, and I've had a really colourful and wonderful path in my career getting to this point. One of those who, one day I was chatting to Andrew and I said, I don't know what to call what I do. And he's like, it's product marketing, you know, epiphany, and one thing led to another. So, interesting journey, different perspective. We've had a lot of perspectives today from really large organizations. I've also done the enterprise thing. I'm back with startups. I love startups. I love how much you can mold things and how fast everything's moving. So this is all framed around everything in the startup space. I'm not Greek, but my big fat Portuguese, South African fat wedding probably doesn't have the same ring to it. But it's funny because my family largely does look like this in terms of how we have lots of aunties and uncles and cousins, and you know, it's very loud and everyone has lots of stories, and I think through that you really learn it's not what you're saying, but it's how you're saying it to cut through all the noise and to cut through all the stories, and stories have always been a really big part of my life. And even more so now having children. Where stories are how they are learning the world, right? And, you know, try and convince my son that this is not a letter, and it's that these are letters and not a word in the alphabet when he sings it. But it's just interesting how we come into this world and everything is shaped around stories. And we all have a bit of a laugh when it comes to B2B marketing, especially in the tech space, and how boring it is. You know, where do the stories go? That's how people learn things, it's how they experience things, and it's how we navigate the world. So as product marketers and marketers in general, we have so many things we can use, right? So many ingredients, and where are the recipes? You know, what do you put together? How do you put it all together, you know? And a lot of things are trends. It could be, you know, now it's product-led growth is all the rage, right? And it's been sales-led and marketing-led, and there's this framework and that acronym. And it's a bit hard to find, you know, like how do you put all those things together and make something work, you know, make those cakes that we're supposed to be making. Love cake, so cake analogy is always great. The client I've been working with called Userback. This was how they were messaging themselves when I started working with them. So nothing too wrong, right? You know, they're specific, they do feedback and, you know, feature requests and bug reports. Of course, they do the typical B2B SaaS thing where we're number one, right? You know, everyone's number one in that space. And they're pretty clear about who they're targeting. The problem with this is you can enter any other brand name in there, right? What's special about what they're bringing to market? So came in there to try and make some good changes. I'm going to use Jackson 5. You know, we couldn't do music intro because that would have really amped things up, but I'm going to use them to paint a little picture of how I put my recipe together, at least to help them to some better messaging and positioning, and what I think really brings the magic to that. So if we look at the ABCs, you know, find your words. So many ways have been discussed today about how we find all the words that we can use when it comes to positioning, right? Who's done a positioning statement? Don't be shy. Yeah. I'm sorry. They're horrible. And I'll go into a little bit why they're horrible. You know, maybe that's, I don't know how spicy that is or if everyone else hates them too. But it's easy, right? You fill in the blanks and there's a way to position something to market. Can you imagine if Apple did the positioning statement like this? Where's the magic, right? It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It still talks about, you know, what they are. They simplify technology, I guess, to a point. They do start with the ideal customer experience and kind of work backwards as to, okay, you know, what would users really need? But where's this in that positioning, right? And that's really where the magic happens, is we've got all these what's, how we do it and what we do, but what are we bringing to our customers? So another reason why I don't like positioning statements, or the way that this typically forces us to go to market, is there is a huge focus on features. And yes, benefits, I'll get to that in a bit, but there's a huge focus on features and competitors. And it's all about how are we better? What are we bringing that's better? And it becomes this feature function comparison rat race, right? Of how we're trying to pull out those things just to be better than the other, rather than carving out our space and owning that space. So on the point of competitors, and quite timely with that session on competitor intelligence, something that I like to run with clients is, yes, be aware of your competitors, right? And especially in the startup space. I mean, you got to hustle at the start. Userback was a very clear example of, they started because they felt there was a need, but everything became about trying to keep up with their competitors, right? It's like, we've got this new feature and we need to get that out there because that one doesn't have it. You'll never win, you know? I read a really good quote this week where innovation is transient, right? It is, you know, you will never, ever, ever win that game. And so what's a very interesting thing to do, especially when you talk to customers, is an alternative analysis that Andrew touched on previously, which is, what do they compare you with? Not what do you compare yourself with? It gives you such a different headspace to work with when you're trying to position either, you know, in this case, an entire company and a brand and a product, where the company is the product, but also, you know, are there sub-products in larger organizations? What are your customers actually comparing yourself with? Because it completely changes your language and gets you out of that rat race. The beautiful place is customers. And Tanya, I don't know where you're sitting. It's really nice to find another like research rabbit hole person when it comes to looking at customers, because where are they? You know, in this case, there was a bit of a pivot in terms of their target market. Subreddits, you know, fly on the wall, just listening in terms of what your target audience could actually be talking about. How are they complaining about their day-to-days? How are they winning in their day-to-days? What companies are they talking about in those places? The beautiful thing when talking to customers, when you're talking about interviewing customers who are using your product, is, what was the change? You know, and that's really the crux of storytelling, is what changed the day that they realized they needed a solution like yours? Those become those magical words that you can use in positioning, right? When you're talking about what changed their lives. How did they feel in the lead up to a solution like yours? How do they feel now that they are using a solution like yours? And you get a lot of those emotive words that you don't typically get when you're talking about technology in this case. What do they say? What are the words that they're saying? Where are they saying it? I feel like those are some of those really rich insights from customers that really feed into collecting those words when it comes to positioning. On that point about benefits, something that I've recently been trying to do more of is, when we look at features, you're told pull it through to benefits, right? But benefits typically don't always arrive at the value. And it's a really nice little map of a way to take features or groups of features, map them to benefits, but then still ask the question, so what? You know, what is the real value that this is bringing to customers? And it gives you more of that beautiful language to use, rather than benefits, which can get quite technical again and feed really back into the feature side of things. So we've got all these words, right? And that's so difficult to distill down. So the 1, 2, 3, prioritize. Who's used these words before? It's so hard, right? You've got all these things that you want to bring to market, and we end up just going, we do it all. Ugh. I find that one of the most difficult things with positioning, especially when it is a startup and you need, like, you are your product. So what is that thing you want to be known for? Do you want to be known as an end-to-end whatever? Do you want to be known as a holistic whatever? Is that really punchy? Is that really like hitting the mark? So finding that one thing is a process, but it's amazing when you can arrive at that point. It is a bit of a gamble sometimes, and it is something that you test out to market. But it really hits home, and the way that we've been looking at it with Userback, and their messaging and everything is still being finalized, so you get a sneak preview of that today. But we've made a call, right? We know what market we want to go after, and we've finalized or distilled it down into what's actually their biggest pain. They have a lot of pains, and there's a lot of benefit that this brings. But what is the biggest pain that if you read that headline, that like hits you right in the heart, right? And so those are the ways that we're trying to distill all of those words down. And telling the story. Is everyone here familiar with narrative design? Yeah? Okay. So there are a few things I really love about narrative design for telling stories, but also across different sizes of organizations. It's a nice way of building out a story to find that change part. And I'd really recommend following Dan Manning on LinkedIn. He's almost become the story guy. Where when we look at telling stories, what are the stories that engage us the most, and where do they start? And typically when we regurgitate stories, we get very technical. We start at the start and we tell you all the background, and then we get to this cool middle part where a change happened, and then we tell you the end. By that time, you've probably lost people, right? And so the argument there is start with the change. So that's taking it from those customer interviews, right? Find the change, start your stories to customers with where the change happened for other customers, or where the change happened that you're promising. Then go back into the beginning, which is, okay, this all led up to the change, and then, hey, this is our beautiful outcome afterwards. And that's a very different way of looking at storytelling. So then narratives help with this when we talk about looking at the old world, right? So what's been happening, whether it's in your target segment, your customer segment, in your business, in the world, information is accessible, everything's all, technology now, and so there are, broader trends that you can look at when you talk about the old world. But what's changed now? Like, what's the new world? And when you do, at least in our case, doing this narrative design has really opened up different conversations within businesses in terms of how they approach things and even who they're targeting. Doing this narrative design with Userback actually completely changed the course of who they were targeting. It came out during that workshop process that, well, we're actually not targeting who we thought we were targeting. The people who we actually want to change and help and target is someone completely different. What's interesting about narrative as well, when you talk about telling that story of who the role is that you're targeting, what's their day-to-day, what do they struggle with, how are they trying to solve their issues currently, we're talking about their alternatives, right? Then you look at what's blocking them from changing. You start to get into objections in that story, so especially working with sales and doing some sort of narrative design like this is super handy because you're already addressing things like objections. And then what's their ideal world, which is what we ideally want to deliver with the product, right? This is the utopia that we're selling. And then what is your solution? And your solution becomes the change. So I find this is a very nice way of going about and telling those stories and how it's applicable in a lot of different situations. Still, you can go through all of this and you could put out that messaging and positioning, and you could still replace your logo with a bunch of other logos, right? So what makes it special? Where's the magic, right? Baby, you and me, girl. The magic in the stories, great quote from Seth Godin, is actually when brand and narrative come together. And I'm partial to this because I have a background in branding, but brands, it's a controversial topic because everyone has a different definition of a brand, right? It's not just your logos and your colors. Your brand is your overarching story, right? It's the personification of your business. Now, by personification, it means you're giving it personal attributes. So how does it sound? If you look at a person, what are your personality attributes? So how do you speak? But what are your your goals, your ideals, your values, and how do you bring yourself or present yourself towards the world, right? Now, that overarching story that every business has to tell, for me, is a huge part of brand and your brand story and how that filters down into all of your messaging. And then everything, we're talking about customer marketing and customer experience earlier. Every single interaction, piece of content, anything you put out there, anywhere where you are as a business, is your brand experience. Everything product marketers do in taking products to market, you're causing brand experiences. And so often brand gets completely left out of the picture, right? Another great guy to follow, Ross Simmons, on LinkedIn and Twitter. He's interesting. He tests a lot of his stuff out on Twitter and then uses it on LinkedIn. Interesting approach. But if you work towards contributing to building a strong brand, now whether it's a startup and you're part of building that brand, or whether you're part of a bigger organization that has an established brand already, the more you can consistently bring that brand out in everything that you do, it makes our lives 10 times easier, right? Because it's already got that awareness. You're already bringing that story out, and you are part of that. You're working less hard on trying to fight the competition and more about building out and carving out your own space. And it's a huge competitive advantage, and we should own it more. And it plays a huge part in the fact that in tech especially, there are going to be so many competitors. We're all trying to solve similar problems. We're all building similar products to do it in certain ways. Innovation, again, transient. Someone's going to catch up eventually. But we all bring a different perspective, whether it's a founder story, something to do with the brand, why the business was started. That brings that uniqueness to the party. So then you get to the point where it's the story only you can tell. When you're starting to look at things like those value words, your customer insight words, your unique point of view as a business, and own that unique point of view as well. That was something with Userback, for example. It came out that they actually had a very strong point of view about the problem space that they were in, but they weren't talking about it. All of their messaging and marketing was very much, we're literally the same as everyone else. It's great to bring that point of view out in the language that you want to use. So then, why do we care about stories at the end of the day? Because we're all here with a job and every business wants to make money, right? So from the research that we've been doing of people who really focus on the right messaging and the right words, it is incredible what it can do to conversion, right? So when you find that message market fit, conversion rates, so typically B2B SaaS, you're looking at 3 to 4% conversion from a site, especially when you're doing product-led growth. It can bump it up drastically just by having the right words. There's another guy, I think he runs Mech Labs, is that it? Yeah. So all they do is website messaging, and they have seen astronomical differences in conversion rates just by changing the words, but the words that matter to your target audience, right? So it's that whole test again. But it's incredible what words can actually do, which almost gives you forgiveness if the product is not up to the same place as a competitor, right? Because you're carving out that presence and awareness around the brand, and it gives you a bit of that relaxation when it comes to keeping up on features. So, big change from the modern feedback tool, right? So they decided during, going through a whole branding and positioning and messaging process is we have a really strong point of view and we have an opinion and we're bold. And going through that process with them, they felt like this has actually given us permission to be able to talk the way that we actually are, to be able to talk the way that we feel, and to break through the boring B2B normal, blah, blah, here's the tool, we do this, we're number one, right? So I think most people can concur, and please don't post photos of this because this is yet to go live, but user feedback is bleeping hard, right? And I think most people agree, and especially with their target market, predominantly product managers. It's a pain in the ass to go through feedback. It's a manual process, right? They're owning that message. And for them, feedback has turned into a knot. It's not a nice little loop that we're all sold to believe, right? It's coming from different places, it's in different formats, it's manual. Trying to get in front of customers all the time is really, really hard, and so it gets neglected. We're now into, 2 weekly agile sprints in terms of getting features out there, and product goes one way, customers go another, right? So it's all about simplifying feedback from collection to completion, and really owning that space and that message of what they're trying to do for customers, hitting them in the hardest place, which is the fact that feedback is so hard. There could be a whole lot of other messages around time saving and it's easier for devs, et cetera, et cetera. We went through a whole list of them, but this one hits home the hardest. And it's just, a small example of what going through that process and going through the brand process as well, and how it's just given them permission to use language so much differently. A few others doing this really, really well. I'm sure most of you have heard of Gong. They're doing a really good job. They've also been promoted a lot, right? But what I found really interesting about this introduction post of theirs on LinkedIn is if you look at a narrative design in terms of what I just talked about, you talk about who, what's hard about their lives, how they're trying to solve it, et cetera, et cetera. They literally turn that narrative into a LinkedIn post where they're already going about, this is what's hard about your job, you're probably trying to do this. These are your objections, we're immediately hitting that, and they turn that into something that they used, right? So I just found that quite powerful in terms of putting that narrative into practice. Up banking, I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Man, they live their brand, don't they? And it's in everything they do, the way that they communicate, the emails you get, the app. I got my new card the other day, and even the paper that you get your new card on, they've got a little maze game on there, and they've got all these different things. But it's amazing how the language that they're using is just so true to their brand and how they stand out amongst every other banking institution there, right? So I just wanted to really highlight that in terms of bringing the brand and the narrative and that positioning together about how you can really create magic. Thank you. And I don't know if anyone's a LinkedIn product marketer or if anyone knows one, but if you do go into your mobile app LinkedIn and you click on the search bar, you can actually click on a QR code and scan each other's, and you don't have to type in names. So networking later, it's a lot easier that way. Product marketers should get on that.
Thank you, Michelle. My Slido won't load. Okay. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about what you were saying, while I wait for this, is your background's brand. You've been doing a lot of product marketing, and then certainly at the end you were talking about the personification of brand. Can you maybe just the synthesis of what the relationship between those two functions are? Because we often see brand is over here, at like really that top level, and product marketing's in the dungeon while we're breaking out.
I guess it comes down to the definition of brand, right? And that's where the conflict is. Everywhere you look, if you try and search on Google for a definition of brand, thousands and thousands of different definitions of brand. And that's why I think, to me, if you were to look at structuring an organization, brand is really that overarching message. Product marketing takes from that message and makes it more specific, whether it's for, specific markets, specific products, for example. And yeah, to me, pulling that through, if we're going after separate personas now, for example, with Userback, we take in that not story, for example, that is their brand. We take in a lot of those elements in the way that we speak. Yes, you tailor it for your target markets, but I think those two really should be brought together. And I think the perception of brand maybe is what needs to change, that's where the divide comes from.
Okay, so...
How'd you go from loop to not?
How did you go from loop to not?
Interesting. So I combed through I don't know how many pages of customer reviews on their products on G2 and Capterra, and the internal stuff that they had on customers, and you look at who's using their products, and you look at the software development lifecycle, for example, which is a loop, and you look at the feedback loop, right? You ask, categorize, action, and follow up, I think is the nice feedback loop. And then their experience as well and why they started the business was feedback loops. You start with the asking, and we're asking for a lot of feedback, right? But then how do you categorize that? And then when you look at that development loop, you've got requirements gathering that goes into design, which goes into development, testing, release, and then back again. And they're all going feedback, right? Developers are talking to customers, designers are talking to customers. And so visually, if you can imagine, all those different avenues of feedback, you've got support teams, you've got customer success teams. It's not this nice ask and categorize feedback, it's a mess. It's handwritten, it's emails, it's phone calls. And what they're looking at doing, or what they already do, is it's a platform that automates that cycle and basically unravels that knot and gives you one place that starts to automate and gives a very nice visual way of capturing feedback that feeds it in and integrates with the development cycle, helps you prioritize because it's almost pre-chewed for you, right? There's context to this feedback now, which you often don't have. And so it's turning it back into something that you can follow up with, whereas the knot is all about it being a huge mess and how do you even follow up, and then you just forget about it because it's too hard. So that was, the path to that.
How do you keep the story authentic?
As opposed to...
Broad question.
Yeah, very broad question. First instinctual reaction to that is by staying true to the brand, but also staying true to customers, I guess. So the story is built around your customers and how they experience the world that they're living in. And I don't, if you go away from that, I think that becomes inauthentic when you're trying to push something to customers. But if you are writing about how customers are experiencing things, I think that stays really authentic, as well as, your brand, your goals, what's the strategy of the company, what's the strategy of the product. And if those things are aligned, I don't really see how it could be inauthentic, I guess. You're solving an actual problem. And you're actually helping, and I think that's very authentic. As soon as you start to push something that's not there and that's not real, that to me is inauthentic. When you lose touch with customers, I hope that answers the question, but find me later if that wasn't right.
How do you balance branding and positioning? The example that they gave was a little spicy. For example, luxury with language and your target market segment.
Yep. Again, it comes down to your target segment and what they can handle. For us, we wouldn't actually use a curse word because the US is our target market. I think they're a bit more sensitive to that than Australians. And so, symbols, it gives you the impression, but it's not actually the word. So I think there are a few luxury brands who are actually being quite bold and different. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think who's been the most recent one to get really really aggressive, and I don't know if it's Calvin Klein or Dior, but they kind of are in the position where they've built up a brand to be able to do that. But I think language is broad, right? I think there are ways to be bold without being offensive. That would be my take on that.
Cool. And then Peter, thoughts on Athena's branding and messaging, if you know who Athena is?
Should I?
Peter?
Athena's a homegrown mortgage company.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and they've really pushed the envelope in terms of messaging all around the city, especially on buses with S&M themes.
Yeah,
Oh.
Okay.
It's
I've
very
missed
spicy.
those.
That's dodgeball
Yeah,
spicy.
talking about spicy. No, I've missed those. They aren't doing that around Brisbane, are they?
No, we're a little more parochial up north.
Maybe Brisbane's not the right target market, but I mean, it's interesting, right? So I don't know. You think Athena? I did see some of their initial ads, and I think they were owning the name Athena and tying it a little bit back into that Greek background, if I recall correctly. But going to S&M is an interesting twist. I'd have to see it.
Break the bondage.
Break the bondage.
So
Clever. Yeah. Yeah. Again, target market, if it's, the younger market, I think we're probably open to those sorts of themes. They're definitely going to be excluding a market. So it's a gamble, right? I mean, you deliberately choose a market, but you also deliberately exclude one, right? Yeah. Choices is gambles, it's testing, Marketing is weird. It's like we've got data and we've got science, but a lot of it is just, let's try it. Let's try it. You're trying to inform yourself as much as possible, but let's try it. Let's see if it works. So, yeah, interesting. Break the bondage.
apparently it worked.
Oh, nice.
And we learned a lot about Peter today. Excuse me.
That's it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, everybody.